the spiritual leader of 1.3 billion Catholics, in those terms was surprising, shocking, disappointing.
Reinhart urged Catholics to reject the idea they have to choose sides. Her group endorsed Trump 2 years ago. Now she thinks it's too soon to know if this spat will lead to a shift in political support.
Are Catholics going to remain in the coalition? That's a question of policies often, not just personality. And I think that that's one that remains to be seen.
But back at St. Michael's, Cassandra Thornton says she's becoming disillusioned with Republicans because of Trump's attacks.
I think he crossed the line. I voted for him in 2024, and I was like, I think he's going to make a good difference, But after when I saw that, I just kind of lost all respect to what he was kind of preaching for America. He kind of went the wrong way. It went south.
She says the president's recent comments may affect how she'll vote in the congressional election in November, but also acknowledge it's still too early to decide. It may be with people like Thornton in mind that Trump is expected to participate in a Bible reading on Tuesday, with the midterms still months away. Carmen Russell-Sluchansky for NPR News, Levittown, Pennsylvania.
WNYC Marketplace is coming up next on the show tonight. The price of tomatoes was up a whopping 22% in March from the year before, according to the latest Consumer Price Index.
It's really tough to tease out, well, how much of this price increase is it because of the war in the Middle East versus the tariffs versus weather, just because all of these things are kind of happening at the same time.
A trip from vine to table to see why the humble tomato is the latest victim of food inflation. That's coming up next on Marketplace. We'll be back with All Things Considered at 7. It's 48 degrees right now. Lows in the mid-30s overnight. It's WNYC at 6:30.
Support for WNYC comes from David Auburn's Proof, starring Iowa Debris, Don Cheadle, Jin Ha, and Kara Young, directed by Hamilton's Thomas Kail, now on Broadway for 15 weeks. Tickets at proofbroadway.com.
This is WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820, NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Marketplace is supported by Wealth Enhancement, a financial planning firm providing comprehensive planning services designed around individual financial goals. Information at wealthenhancement.com/build.
What should you look at to see what the war is doing to this economy? Well, when you find out, let us know, would you? I'm kidding. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by The Economist, providing reporting and analysis on global politics, economics, science, and culture, covering international trends and emerging issues shaping the world today. More information at economist.com. And by Solidigm, offering solid-state storage solutions optimized for AI with higher capacities, greater speed, and energy efficiency. Solidigm, AI data infrastructure built on a solid foundation. Learn more at storageforai.com. And by ADP Research, committed to making the world of work more productive through data-driven discovery. Insights at work for the future of work. Learn more at adpresearch.com.
In Los Angeles, I'm Kai Ryssdal. It is Monday today, 20 April. Good as always to have you along, everybody. Let us begin today with what I hope is a self-evident truth. Nobody knows what's gonna happen. The strait is open. No, it's not. Talks are happening. No, they're not. You get the picture. And should you be looking to market indicators to make sense of things? Don't. Equities honestly don't know which way to turn, and you kind of can't blame them. Oil and other commodities are being whipsawed as well, which is why we are going with the bond market to start week 8 of this war. Treasuries, as have we all, have had a lot to digest, but they can be a crystal ball of sorts. Demand for government bonds can tell us how nervous investors are as they turn to treasuries in times of trouble. And the yields those traders demand can tell us how much inflation they expect. So, Marketplace's Justin Ho starts us off with the signals that short, medium, and long-term government bond yields are sending us right now.
Yields on short-term government debt, as in treasuries that mature in a couple of years or less, are heavily influenced by what traders expect the Federal Reserve to do with interest rates.
Traders have concluded the Fed is very likely on hold at least through this year and perhaps through next year as well.
That's Chris Lowe, chief economist with FHN Financial. He says short-term yields are basically in line with the federal funds rate, which the Fed sets. That's a signal that traders don't expect any changes. Lowe says investors think this because the war is causing inflation to pick up.
The Fed would, in fact, like to cut rates probably another 0.5% at some point, but they're not going to do it until inflation is materially lower than it is now.
Then there's medium-term yields, treasuries that mature in 5 or 7 years.
If you are investing in 5-year notes or 7-year notes, longer-term inflation expectations become a bigger concern.
That's John Canavan, lead economic analyst at Oxford Economics. He says even though the war is pushing up inflation in the short term, longer-term inflation expectations are actually tamer.
And what we have seen since the prospect of an end to the war grew a little bit more optimistic, we've seen a decline in those inflation expectations, a notable decline.
That kind of optimism has also helped to relieve pressure on long-term bonds that mature in 10, 20, or 30 years. Randy Vogel is head of fixed income with Wilmington Trust.
With a less drawn-out conflict or resolution to the conflict, defense spending doesn't increase as significantly and budget deficits don't jump as big as they would have otherwise.
Which means the Treasury Department wouldn't have to flood the market with new debt and pay higher interest rates to attract borrowers. But if the war escalates,
that would most likely mean higher budget deficits, more defense spending,
and higher interest rates on long-term Treasury bonds and on credit card debt, mortgages, and all of the other kinds of debt that bond yields influence. I'm Justin Ho for Marketplace.
Here's one for your macroeconomic calendar. Should you find yourself with a free moment tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock Eastern, you could do worse than tuning into the Senate Banking Committee hearing. The guest of honor will be Kevin Warsh, President Trump's pick to chair the Federal Reserve. Wall Street today. So look, here's a thought. Maybe traders are just done with the war and all the head-snapping news thereof. Major indices down a little bit. We'll have the details when we do the numbers. There's just a lot happening in this economy right now between the lingering effects of tariffs and inflation and slowing growth and the war. And it's going to be months at least before consumers start to feel the full effects. But effects a bit short of full are beginning to crop up. And our bellwether of choice today is fresh tomatoes. The most recent consumer price index shows tomato prices were up 15% in March from a month earlier, up more than 22% in the past year. Marketplace's Kristen Schwab looks at the humble tomato and the cost increases along its supply chain.
Alejandro Sanchez has been growing tomatoes in Mexico for more than 15 years. And he says if he had to start all over, honestly, he would think twice.
I don't know that I would have done it if I had known. It's much harder than I thought.
Tomatoes are a high-maintenance crop. Sanchez, who's managing director at Vista Produce, says they need the perfect balance of temperature, light, and fertilizer.
You can do everything right and still have a terrible year. So, for example, right now I have pests that I didn't have 12 years ago. There's a type of spider, like red spider. Never seen it. Now it's all over.
Spiders aren't even his biggest worry right now. What really keeps him up at night is how much the economics of growing tomatoes is changing. Minimum wage in Mexico went up 13% at the beginning of the year. And cherry tomatoes are labor intensive. Each one has to be picked by hand. Packaging has also gotten more expensive.
Like we had to increase the width of the polyfoam because tomatoes would get bruised otherwise.
And this is all before the produce even hits the border. According to the USDA, about a quarter of every dollar Americans spend on vegetables is tied to farm production. And yes, tomatoes are vegetables, not fruits, according to U.S. tax law. The rest of the cost of growing a tomato is mostly transportation and import taxes. David Ortega is a food economist at Michigan State.
And so it's really this perfect storm of factors that are impacting tomato prices.
Last summer, the U.S. put a 17% tax on Mexican tomatoes, and the timing of that tax collided with a terrible growing season in the U.S. A cold snap in Florida, where most domestic fresh tomatoes are farmed, caused $160 million in damage. It's put more pressure on imports, which Ortega says makes up 70% of American supply.
It's really tough to tease out, well, how much of this price increase is it because of the war in the Middle East versus the tariffs versus weather, just because all of these things are kind of happening at the same time.
Skip Hewlett is chief legal officer at NatureSweet, which handles every part of the tomato chain from growing to importing to distribution.
We like to say we take our product from seed to smile.
He says because of the war, diesel prices are up. They spiked more than 40% in March alone. It means getting tomatoes from Mexico to grocery stores all over the U.S. is getting more expensive.
When you transport them, it's under refrigeration, in other words, cold chain.
Which uses more diesel than a regular freight truck. With this long list of pressures, stunted supply, growing labor costs, high import taxes, pressure on fertilizer prices and gas prices, tomatoes will likely continue to cost a pretty penny all summer.
You know, if you eat a hamburger, you have tomatoes on it. If you eat a salad, you have tomatoes on it. If you eat pasta, you have tomato sauce.
And experts say it's only a matter of time before the price of fresh tomatoes starts trickling down to the price of canned and processed foods. I'm Kristen Schwab for Marketplace.
There was some research out from Morgan Stanley not too long ago that showed about 60% of the most prestigious AI institutions on the planet are in the United States. So, yes, this country is a leader in artificial intelligence, but also 40% of leading AI institutions are not here. And it turns out China is closing in fast, very fast. Sebastian Mallaby is just back from a reporting trip to China to see what artificial intelligence is like there. He's with the Council on Foreign Relations, and he's the author most recently of a book called The Infinity Machine. The headline on his piece in the New York Times about his trip is, "I went to China to see its progress on AI. We can't beat it." Mr. Mallaby, welcome to the program. Good to have you on.
So great to be with you.
So you go to China to talk about artificial intelligence. In a nutshell, what did you see?
The big surprise, Kai, was that when I was there, people brought up safety more than I had expected. You know, I was in 4 different cities, Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, Hangzhou, and pretty much everywhere I went, whether I was talking to tech leaders at companies or AI researchers at universities, they would say to me, look, we have this window right now to make AI safer before it gets too powerful, and we need to seize it.
Here's the thing, though, that I don't quite get about China and its development in artificial intelligence. The Biden administration, Secretary Raimondo, went to great lengths to impose limits on what the Chinese could use of American AI development, the chip exports, all of those things. And the gist of your piece is that hasn't worked. The Chinese figured out a way around it, and we have to deal with it.
Pretty much, yes. I mean, those export controls were imposed by the United States and its allies in 2022, so points to the Biden team for seeing this coming before ChatGPT was even released. But it didn't work in terms of depriving China of cutting-edge AI models. They went ahead and they figured out a way of building them anyway.
Did they just like reverse engineer what we've done? I mean, it seems too simple to say that, but that's sort of, how else are they doing it?
Well, that is part of it. There is this technique called distillation, where a Chinese model maker can get lots of outputs from an American one, and those outputs help it to more efficiently train its own AI model. But then there's also the fact that China has excellent AI engineers. It produces scientific papers on AI at a prodigious rate. We shouldn't underestimate just how good they are.
Aside from the experts that you spoke with, how are lay Chinese people using AI? Because look, I'm a bad example. I dabble in it, but that's the broad swath of America, right? There are people who are really good, but most people are like, yeah, it's a thing. We use it sometimes. What's it like over there?
There's more optimism about AI in China and in Asia generally than there is in the United States. I think if you look at the polls in the US, 2 out of 3 people see AI as a threat, not an opportunity. In China, there's much more readiness to download even models that might be a bit dangerous, like the OpenClaw one, which was a big thing about a month ago. And when I was in China, there were photographs in the newspapers of mom and pop consumers lining up outside tech companies to get help from the engineers to install this OpenClaw thing on their laptops.
Just to see what it could do, just for the heck of it.
Yeah, because it's an agent and you can tell the agent to, organize all the information on your laptop, and it's fun to play around with, but it's also dangerous, and they didn't seem to mind.
You suggest in this piece in the Times from the other day that really what needs to happen now is, I'm paraphrasing, but work with me here. Enough of the AI arms race. What needs to happen is that China and the United States have to get together and negotiate some kind of global safety pact on artificial intelligence. Is that fair, as a fair characterization?
Pretty much. I mean, some element of arms race and competition is inevitable, but I think you can try and do both at the same time. In the Cold War, that was when the agreement for the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, was done. Then you go forward to the 60s, and despite the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was agreed. So you can have what's known as adversarial cooperation, and I think that's what we need to think about now.
Which I appreciate, and of course Reagan and Trust But Verify does come to mind, but Donald Trump and Xi Jinping are not Leonid Brezhnev and Ronald Reagan.
That's true, but maybe they need to switch, right? I mean, I actually think that in China, at the elite level, in terms of sort of AI company leaders, influential academic researchers, these people whose views often do filter up into the Communist Party were much more open to talking about safety than I expected. Now, on the American side, you're right that there was no interest in controlling AI until maybe a couple of weeks ago, because then you had Mythos, this new cyber hacking model, come out, and all of a sudden Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is summoning the banks, telling them to take it seriously. And I think there's a bit of a mood change in Washington about needing to regulate AI.
Sebastian Mallaby, just back from China on a reporting trip. He's at the Council on Foreign Relations. Also, he's got a new book out, mostly about the subject at hand, actually. It's called The Infinity Machine. Sebastian, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it.
Great to be with you.
Coming up.
Not to toot my own horn, but we make colorful, fun, and functional things.
Well, color me curious, huh? First, though, let's do the numbers. Dow Industrial's basically flat, 49,442. The Nasdaq down 64 points, about 0.25%, 24,404. The S&P 500 subtracted 16 points, also 0.25%. Ended things at 7109. War? What war? Speaking of which, renewed unrest between the U.S. and Iran maybe has vexed U.S. airlines. We don't really know. Investor worry, of course, is higher fuel costs and lower demand. Delta dipped 0.7%. United down 2.8%. JetBlue declined 2%. In the cruise industry, Carnival down 0.7%. Norwegian descended 3.5%. Royal Caribbean, or Caribbean, take your pick, down 1.1%. Energy, you ask? Sure, we can do that. ConocoPhillips rose 1/3%. ExxonMobil picked up 0.8%. Chevron went the other way, down 0.4%. Ahead of new figures on retail sales tomorrow, about which more in a second. Performance of a couple of retail stocks today. Dollar General lost about 0.2%. Home Depot gained 0.4%. Bond prices went down. Yield on the 10-year T-note rose 4.25%. You're listening to Marketplace.
The Numbers is supported by Mercury, a fintech that offers banking, credit cards, and financial software. Marketplace is supported by Odoo.com, offering integrated programs for sales, customer relationship management, inventory, and other business operations, designed to work together as a customizable software suite. Odoo, all your business on one platform. And by BMC. BMC helps customers worldwide run and modernize their businesses by automating, managing, and optimizing complex IT environments. Learn more at bmc.com. And by Ninja One, the Ninja One unified IT operations platform used by 35,000 customers in over 140 countries with solutions to support IT resilience and operational efficiency. Unify IT, simplify work. NinjaOne.com.
In the Broadway revival of the 1925 Noel Coward comedy Fallen Angels, Rose Byrne and Kelly O'Hara star as longtime best friends who once had an affair with the same man. Now he's back and they don't know whether to flee or to pounce on him. So they have a lot of drinks. A lot of drinks. On the next All of It, they join us to discuss. I'm Allison Stewart. Join me for All of It, weekdays at noon on WNYC.
WNYC receives support from RSM, working to empower middle-market businesses to navigate change with strategies and execution designed to help conquer disruption. RSM, experience the power of being understood.
You're listening to Marketplace on WNYC. Coming up in the 7 o'clock hour of All Things Considered, while President Trump presses for an end to wars in Iran and Lebanon, many Israelis support fighting on. We're going to get reaction to the ceasefire coming up in the 7 o'clock hour. Stay with us.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Rizdal. We're going to do a 1-2 here on war and what it is doing to U.S. consumers and businesses. Because while it is true that this country has been less affected than Europe and Asia, what's happening here is not nothing. Case in point, that global commodity, crude oil and its derivatives. The national average for a gallon of diesel fuel sits right now at $5.53 a gallon. That is from AAA. A year ago, $3.57. And for a whole lot of companies in this economy, smaller ones in particular, the costs of war are very, very real. Stephanie Hughes
West
has
Plains
our story.
Veterinary Supply in Springfield, Missouri, their customers are pet stores and farm stores, and they sell things like cattle IDs, animal vaccines, a lot of dog food.
Pretty much everything that goes in or on an animal.
Joseph Babbitt is an accountant with the company, which owns a fleet of trucks to make deliveries. All of them run on diesel, and since the war began, the company's fuel costs have risen on average by $5,000 a week.
Just depending on how many miles we're running that week.
Babbitt says the company hasn't raised their prices yet, but he says eventually they might have to. Rising diesel prices have also affected George Peak. He owns and operates a 100-acre cotton, soybean, and pecan farm in central Georgia.
We're actually in a kind of a major drought right now, and so diesel is a big part of our irrigation.
You're not beating me.
This has just added 30%, 35% to our fuel cost, and that's concerning.
But Peak says there's another aspect to the war in Iran. It's driven up the price of one of the crops he grows, cotton.
That's because the big competition for cotton is polyester, which comes from oil. So the increase in oil prices has inadvertently really helped us.
And when polyester goes up in price, that means there's more demand for cotton.
And I'm like, yes, people, quit wearing that dadgum oil on your body, wear cotton.
In Annapolis, Maryland, commercial diver Bill Eubanks runs his own business, Harbor Diving Services. He repairs everything from small boats to large shipping vessels. He says his worry is that high diesel prices will keep people from taking their pleasure boats out.
I need them to go out and break something up, sink, or blow something up.
Eubanks says it's just the start of the boating season. He'll know in the next couple months whether he has successfully navigated these uncertain waters. In Baltimore, I'm Stephanie Hughes for Marketplace.
The flip side of how businesses are doing right now is, of course, how consumers are doing. And we'll get a sense of that in the morning when the Census Bureau releases retail sales for March. Consumers, as we know, have been disgruntled for a good long while now, but that hasn't really had much of an effect on how we're spending. Marketplace's Samantha Fields has more on what we might learn in the morning.
Every expectation is that retail sales were likely strong in March. Elizabeth Pancotti at the Groundwork Collaborative says there are two reasons for that.
One is it is tax refund season, and we know that every tax refund season we see a bump in retail sales as folks spend those one-time refunds. And two, as prices go up, retail sales go up.
And prices have been going up. But she says refunds, which are bigger than usual this year because of last year's budget bill, are the main reason for the expected bump in spending. That infusion of cash is likely making people less sensitive to price increases from both tariffs and the war in Iran, at least for now.
I suspect as we head out of tax season, this is really the inflection point in all of that data.
Especially if the war continues and prices keep rising. But Mark Matthews at the National Retail Federation says that is still an if.
We'd need to see at least a few more months of higher prices, I think, before it really begins to impact consumers' ability to spend.
Inflation fears and the war are already affecting how consumers feel about the economy. The latest consumer sentiment numbers are the worst they've ever been.
But like we have seen since 2020, there's been a complete disconnect between consumer psyche and consumer spending.
Gas prices have a big impact on consumers' psyches, and they're now about $1 higher than before the war. Wendy Edelberg at West Exec Advisors says that translates to roughly $70 more a month on average for a two-car household.
That's unpleasant, but I don't think that that's enough to get people to radically change their spending plans.
What could is if oil and gas prices stay high and push the cost of all sorts of other things up, too.
I think the way that the war is going to show up is through grindingly higher inflation that just comes more broadly.
But Edelberg says that's going to take a little time. I'm Samantha Fields for Marketplace.
Sam just gave us the macro on expectations for the retail and consumer economy a minute ago, but it is always good to pair that big picture analysis with the micro, the people who are actually doing the buying and, for us right now, the selling in this economy. Annie Lang Hartman is one of our retailer regulars. She runs Wild Letty. That's a gift and stationery store in Leelanau County, Michigan.
Business for Wild Letty right now is actually pretty good. It's just the start of the year for us. Winter is very slow. For the year, we're up 10%, which feels really, really good. Most of the money that is coming in is online orders, and then we also do wholesale, so we work with other retailers all over the country. We're definitely feeling the price increases. Our utilities are going up. One of the things I've really been noticing is our shipping costs are going way up. We offer free shipping for online customers if they purchase a specific amount of product, so like 75 or more. With shipping costs being so high, we're definitely going to have to raise that threshold this year. I feel like I hung on for as long as I could, but it is time to raise that threshold. People that are coming in the door and spending money are just wanting to spend money on something that's going to make them happy right now. So I feel like that is the perfect place to do that. Not to toot my own horn, but we make colorful, fun, and functional things. So we're kind of hitting that with people that have spendable income right now. This time of year, it's that crunch of not much sales are coming in, but we're spending a significant amount of money getting products ready for the summer. So it's kind of just like, hold on, things are going to be absolutely wild in just a few weeks. This is my favorite time of year, kind of just getting this hard work done so we can just focus on talking to customers in the summer.
Annie Lang Hartman, Wild Letty, Leelanau County, Michigan.
Marketplace is supported by Progressive Insurance, providing direct car insurance rates side by side with other insurance carriers. Customers can see rates and find an option that works for their needs. Now that's Progressive. Learn more at progressive.com. And by GEP, at the forefront of agentic procurement orchestration and autonomous supply chains. With GEP Smart Software, GEP Key Agentic AI, and Strategy Consulting, GEP works to help business optimize value and reduce risk.
This final note on the way out today, Tim Cook is getting kicked upstairs. Apple announced this afternoon that after 15 years in charge, Cook is going to become executive chairman. The corner office, if you will, in Apple's billion-dollar, notably round headquarters building in Cupertino, goes to John Ternus, who, should you not be familiar with him, is currently the Senior VP of Hardware Engineering. Amir Bibawi, Caitlin Esch, John Gordon, Noya Carr, Steve Mullis, and Stephanie Seek are the Marketplace editing staff. Kelly Silvera is the news director. And I'm Kai Ryssdal. We will see you tomorrow, everybody. This is APM.